I still remember that moment in my mom's kitchen. She was standing there, trying to make coffee, but couldn't remember how to use the machine she'd had for 10 years. When I gently reminded her, she snapped at me, something she'd never done before. That night I lay awake wondering, when did our roles start to reverse? And why haven't we talked about it? If you've ever noticed your once independent parent struggling with everyday tasks, or avoided bringing up concerns about their driving, finances, or living situation, you're not alone. I waited too long to have those critical conversations, and that waiting cost us both dearly, in ways I never anticipated. Let's be honest, nobody dreams of the day they'll need to talk to their parents about aging. It feels unnatural, uncomfortable, even disrespectful. We grew up seeing them as our protectors, our guides through life. They were the ones who taught us to tie our shoes and drive a car. They were invincible in our eyes. I spent years noticing subtle changes in my mom. The unopened mail piling up, the missed appointments, the dents in her car she couldn't explain. Each time I told myself, it's not that bad yet, or she'd be so offended if I brought it up. I convinced myself that waiting for a crisis was somehow kinder than having an awkward conversation. But here's what I've learned since becoming part of this sandwich generation. Caught between caring for my own kids and my aging parents, avoidance isn't kindness. It's fear disguised as respect. When we finally had our first real talk about her changing needs, Mom admitted something that floored me. "I've been scared for months," she said. "I just didn't know how to tell you without feeling like I was becoming a burden." All that time, we'd both been suffering in silence, each trying to protect the other. Before we dive into the how of these conversations, let's talk about when. Because timing isn't about waiting for the perfect moment. It's about not waiting until it's too late. For my family, there were signs I wish I'd paid more attention to sooner. Physical changes came first. Mom's arthritis made cooking difficult, but she'd never mention it. Instead, I'd noticed she was eating more frozen meals and less of the homemade food she once loved. Financial warning signs appeared too, bills paid twice or not at all. When I finally helped organize her accounts, I found late fees and subscription services she didn't remember signing up for. Safety concerns became impossible to ignore. The small kitchen fire, because she forgot the stove was on. The medication mix-ups. The time she got lost driving to the grocery store she'd been visiting for decades. Social withdrawal happened so gradually, I barely noticed. My once social mother began declining invitations, limiting her world to the four walls of her home. What I've learned from other caregivers is that these patterns are remarkably common. The changes often happen incrementally, so slowly that we adapt without realizing how much has actually shifted until we're in crisis mode. And that's precisely why we need to have these conversations earlier rather than later, while our parents can still fully participate in decisions about their future. Before you initiate any conversation about aging and care, it's essential to understand what's at stake emotionally for both of you. For our parents, these discussions can trigger profound fears. Fear of losing independence, fear of becoming a burden, fear of their own mortality. When my mom resisted the idea of having someone help with housekeeping, it wasn't about the cleaning itself. It was about what accepting help symbolized to her, the beginning of the end of her. Self-sufficiency. On our side, we're wrestling with our own emotional hurricanes. There's the grief of witnessing our parents' decline, the anxiety about making the right decisions. The guilt that somehow we should be doing more. And often, there's unresolved family dynamics bubbling beneath the surface. I remember sitting with my brother after a particularly difficult doctor's appointment with Mom, where we learned her memory issues were more serious than we thought. He turned to me and said, "Does it feel like we're still trying to get Dad's approval for how we're handling this?" Our father had passed away years earlier, but those patterns, those needs for validation, they don't disappear. These conversations exist in this emotionally charged space where past, present, and future collide. Recognizing this doesn't make the talks easier, but it does make us more compassionate participants. So how do you actually begin these difficult discussions? I've learned, sometimes the hard way, that how you start sets the tone for everything that follows. First, timing matters. Choose a moment when everyone is calm, not already stressed, and when you have uninterrupted time. I made the mistake of bringing up my concerns about Mom's driving right before a family gathering. Not only did it put her on the defensive, but it cast a shadow over what should have been a joyful occasion. Second, location can make a difference. Private, comfortable settings work best. For my mom, serious conversations always went better at her kitchen table, her territory, where she felt most in control. Third, your approach should open doors, not back your parent into a corner. Instead of saying, "Mom, we need to talk about you not being able to live alone anymore," I learned to say, "I've been thinking about how we can make sure you can stay independent as long as possible. Can we talk about some options?" I've found that starting with questions rather than statements creates space for collaboration. "Dad, what would you want us to do if you ever couldn't make medical decisions for yourself? Or have you thought about what might happen if taking care of this house becomes too much?" Sometimes, using a third-party example can ease into the conversation. My friend's father just had a health scare, and they weren't prepared with any of his information. It made me realize we should probably talk about these things too. And sometimes, honesty about your own feelings is the best approach. "Mom, I've been worried about some things I've noticed, and I've been afraid to bring them up because I don't want to upset you. But I think not talking about it is making us both more anxious." The most successful conversations I've had with my parents started with me being vulnerable first, admitting my fears, my uncertainties, my desire to respect their autonomy while still ensuring their well-being. One of the most challenging aspects of this journey is navigating the gradual role reversal without stripping our parents of their dignity. Because no matter how the dynamics shift, they are still our parents. They still need to feel respected, valued, and heard. I learned this lesson painfully when I started taking over Mom's medication management. I efficiently organized her pills, explained the new system, and thought I'd done a great job. But later that night, she called me in tears. "I used to be a nurse," she said. "I spent decades giving medications to others, and now I can't even be trusted with my own." That moment, it broke my heart. I realized I'd handled the practical aspects, but completely missed the emotional impact of what that change represented to her. Since then, I've tried to approach every new assistance need with this question: how can we address this necessity while preserving as much of Mom's autonomy and dignity as possible? Sometimes it means creating the illusion of independence even when providing support. My friend's father insists on paying his own bills, though he frequently makes errors. Their solution: he writes the checks, then his daughter reviews them before mailing, preserving his sense of financial control while preventing costly mistakes. Sometimes it means acknowledging expertise and history. When we needed to downsize Mom's house, I made sure to ask questions like, "What's the story behind this item?" Or, "Which of these things matter most to you?" It transformed the process from me making decisions for her to me learning from her, putting her back in the position of teacher, of parent. And sometimes, it simply means giving choices within necessary constraints. Not "you need to stop driving," but "would you prefer to have a driving evaluation, or should we arrange for transportation services?" This role reversal dance requires incredible sensitivity, patience, and creativity. It's about finding that delicate balance between necessary care and preserving the parent-child relationship that has defined both your lives. Let's talk about something every caregiver faces at some point: resistance. Because no matter how thoughtfully you approach these conversations, you may still hit walls of denial, anger, or outright refusal. When I finally brought up my concerns about Mom's memory issues, her response was textbook. "There's nothing wrong with my memory. I just have too much on my mind." You're overreacting like you always do. That defensiveness. It's rarely about stubbornness. It's about fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of what acknowledging these changes might mean. So how do we respond when our well-intentioned concerns are met with resistance? First, don't try to win the argument. When I pushed back with examples of Mom's memory lapses, it only entrenched her position. Instead, I learned to acknowledge her perspective. "I understand this is difficult to talk about, and maybe I am being cautious. I just want to make sure you're safe." Second, be willing to take smaller steps. When my mother refused a complete medical evaluation, we compromised on a regular checkup that included some cognitive screening. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was movement in the right direction. Third, sometimes bringing in a trusted third party changes the dynamic. My mom would dismiss my concerns about her health, but when her pastor expressed the same worries, she listened. For your family, that person might be a longtime family doctor, a respected friend, or another relative. Fourth, timing is everything. Some days are simply better than others. I learned to watch for moments when Mom seemed more reflective or open. Often after she'd experienced a difficulty she couldn't easily explain away. And finally, know when to step back temporarily. Unless there's immediate danger, sometimes the wisest move is to retreat and try again later with a different approach. I spent 3 frustrating months trying to convince my mother to accept in-home help. What finally worked wasn't my persuasive arguments, but an invitation to lunch at my house where, coincidentally, my neighbor's caregiver was there helping her. Seeing that relationship, how it enhanced rather than diminished my neighbor's independence, accomplished what all my logical explanations couldn't. If there's one thing I wish someone had told me earlier in this journey, it's this: you cannot do this alone. And you shouldn't try to. Caregiver burnout is real. The emotional toll, the practical demands, the constant decision-making, it all adds up. I thought I could handle everything myself. After all, Mom only had one daughter, and this was my responsibility, right? That thinking landed me in the emergency room with stress-induced chest pains that fortunately weren't a heart attack, but they were certainly a wake-up call. Building a support network isn't just beneficial, it's essential. And it needs to happen on multiple levels. Start with family, even distant or complicated ones. My brother and I had different perspectives on Mom's care, which led to some heated arguments. But working through those differences, while painful, ultimately gave Mom better care than either of our individual approaches would have provided. Look beyond family to friends and community. When I finally admitted to my book club how overwhelmed I was, one member connected me with an elder law attorney who transformed our planning. Another friend set up a meal train during a particularly difficult month after Mom's surgery. Seek professional guidance early. Geriatric care managers, elder law attorneys, financial advisors who specialize in retirement. These professionals can save you countless hours and help you avoid costly mistakes. I waited too long to consult. Experts trying to figure everything out through Google searches at 2 a.m. And perhaps most importantly, find emotional support from those who understand. Caregiver support groups, whether in person or online, provide a space where you don't have to explain or justify your feelings, where you can admit the uncomfortable truths, that sometimes you feel angry, resentful, or just exhausted by the person you love so deeply. I remember my first support group meeting. I sat in my car afterward and cried, not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time, I didn't feel alone in this journey. I didn't feel like I was failing because I found it hard. I just felt understood. One of the most valuable perspectives I've gained through this journey is the importance of parallel processing, planning for future needs while fully inhabiting the present moment. The practical planning is essential. Legal documents like advance directives, powers of attorney, and updated wills provide critical protection. Financial planning helps prevent crises down the road. Researching care options before they're needed gives you time to make thoughtful choices rather than emergency decisions. But alongside that necessary planning needs to be an equally intentional focus on the present, on finding joy, connection, and meaning in each day. When my mother's dementia diagnosis came, I fell into a trap. I became so focused on researching disease progression, care facilities, and treatment options that I nearly missed the woman still sitting in front of me. Yes, she was changing, but she was still here, still capable of joy, still my mother. It was actually my 10-year-old daughter who called me back to the present. "Mommy," she said, "Grandma doesn't remember what we did yesterday, but she still laughs at our jokes. Can we just make her laugh today instead of being sad all the time?" From that wisdom, we developed what our family calls memory-free moments, experiences focused entirely on the present. We sing songs Mom has known since childhood. We feel the sun on our faces in the garden. We eat ice cream cones and don't worry about the drips. In these moments, the disease recedes and connection takes center stage. This balance between necessary future planning and present moment living is perhaps the greatest challenge of the caregiver journey. But it's also where the deepest gifts can be found. I want to end by sharing something that might sound strange if you're in the early stages of this caregiving journey. There are profound gifts hidden within this challenging path. I don't say this to minimize the difficulties. The sleepless nights, the heartbreaking decisions, the grieving for what's been lost, these are real and sometimes overwhelming. But alongside them, if we remain open, come unexpected blessings. There's a depth of relationship that can emerge. As I helped my mother with increasingly personal care, the pretenses and roles that had sometimes complicated our relationship fell away. There were moments of raw honesty, surprising laughter, and connections that transcended words. There's the discovery of strength you never knew you had. I was the child who needed a nightlight until college, who called my mother over every minor crisis. I never imagined I could navigate medical emergencies, financial complexities, and heart-wrenching decisions, but I did. And so will you. There's the community that forms around shared vulnerability. Some of my deepest friendships now are with people I met through support groups or hospital waiting rooms, people who understand this journey without explanation. And there's the profound perspective shift. Small irritations that once seemed important fade. Against the backdrop of witnessing a parent's mortality, you learn to prioritize differently, to value presence over perfection, to find meaning in the smallest acts of care. My mother passed away last year. The journey was longer and harder than I could have imagined when it began with that forgotten coffee machine. There were mistakes made, regrets accumulated, moments I wish I could do over. But in her final weeks, as I sat holding her hand, I realized something I want to share with all of you. The conversations I wished I'd had sooner. We eventually had them. Not in the way I'd planned, not always with the outcomes I'd hoped for, but we had them. And each one, even the difficult ones, even the ones that ended in tears, moved us forward together. So if you're standing where I once stood, noticing changes in your aging parent, feeling uncertain about how to proceed, worried about saying the wrong thing, here's what I want you to know. The perfect time to start these conversations was probably yesterday, but the second best time is today. Begin gently. Begin imperfectly. Begin with love and respect as your foundation. But please begin. Because on this caregiver journey, the conversations we have, awkward, emotional, and necessary as they may be, become the bridge that carries both generations forward with dignity. If this resonates with you, I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. What conversations have been most difficult for you to initiate with your parents? What approaches have worked? What questions do you still have? And if you found value in today's discussion, please consider subscribing to this channel. We're building a community of support for those navigating the complex terrain of caring for aging parents. Because while this may be one of life's most challenging journeys, it's not one any of us should walk alone. Until next time, remember that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite it. And sometimes, the most important words are the hardest ones to say.